He was the kind of man people would let die and no one would question it, but she ran into the fire anyway. The night the mansion burned, the sky above Westchester glowed a violent orange as flames swallowed the upper floors of Ethan Cole's estate. Smoke poured through shattered windows, and alarms screamed into the cold air. Staff scattered across the marble driveway, some crying, some frozen, some already calling for help, but no one dared go back inside. Not for him, not for the man who had spent years breaking people down with a single look. Ethan lay unconscious in his private study, the door half collapsed, the air thick with choking heat and silence creeping in around him, and outside among the chaos stood Lily Carter, her uniform stained with ash, her hands trembling as she stared at the entrance she had just escaped from. She could leave. She should leave. Every instinct told her to run, to survive, to finally be free of the man who had humiliated her day after day, but instead she turned back toward the fire before continuing. Comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. The heat hit her like a wall as she stepped inside again, each breath sharper than the last. The hallway flickering with shadows as burning wood cracked above her. Every step forward felt like stepping deeper into something she might not return from. But Lily did not hesitate, not this time, not when life, even as life, was still inside. She wrapped a damp cloth over her mouth and pushed forward, calling his name, though she barely expected an answer. Somewhere beyond the smoke, a beam collapsed, sending sparks into the air, and for a moment, everything went silent, except for the pounding of her heart. She remembered the way he had looked at her that morning, cold, dismissive, as if she were less than invisible. She remembered the laughter from the other staff when he criticized her in front of them. She remembered the weight of every word that told her she did not matter, and still she kept moving because somewhere deep inside her there was something stronger than fear, stronger than pride, something that refused to let another human being die alone in the dark, even if that human being had never shown her kindness. And as she reached the doorway to his study, the flames surged behind her, sealing the path. She had come from. Lily Carter stepped into the fire not because he deserved to be saved, but because she was the kind of person who could not walk away. The fire roared louder as Lily stepped deeper into the study, the heat pressing against her skin like a living force. The ceiling above cracked and groaned, threatening to collapse at any second, and for a brief moment she froze, not out of fear, but out of instinct, her eyes scanning the room through the smoke, thick and blinding, searching for any sign of him, the man who had made her feel small every single day, the man who now lay somewhere in this burning silence, waiting to be found. She coughed, pulling the damp cloth tighter against her mouth as her lungs burned with every breath. Ethan, she called out, her voice strained, unfamiliar, saying his name out loud. She had never said it before. Not once, not when he stood just a few feet away, issuing orders, not when he dismissed her without a second glance. But now his name felt different, heavier, like something that mattered. A faint crash echoed from the far side of the room, and she turned toward it, her heart racing as she moved forward step by step over shattered glass and fallen wood, until finally she saw him. Ethan Cole lay on the floor near his desk, one arm twisted beneath him, his face pale, streaked with soot. A beam had fallen across part of the room, blocking the exit behind him, and for a second Lily just stared at him. This was the man who had laughed when she spilled coffee, the man who once told her she was replaceable, the man who never once looked her in the eye, and yet now he looked fragile, human, breakable. Lily dropped to her knees beside him, her hands shaking as she reached for his shoulder. Ethan, wake up, she said more firmly this time, but he did not move. The only sound was the crackling fire closing in around them. She glanced toward the doorway, flames licking across the frame, cutting off the easy path out, and that was when reality struck her. If she stayed any longer, she might not make it out at all. Her chest tightened, and for a split second doubt crept in. She could leave. She could still save herself. No one would blame her. No one would even question it, because people like him were not meant to be saved by people like her. But then something shifted inside her, something quiet but unbreakable. She slipped her arm under his shoulders, struggling to lift his weight. He was heavier than she expected, his body limp, unresponsive, and every second the air grew hotter. Harder to breathe. Come on, she whispered through clenched teeth as she pulled him inch by inch across the floor. The fire surged behind them, a loud crack splitting the air as part of the ceiling gave way, sending sparks raining down around them. Lily flinched, but did not stop. Her muscles burned, her vision blurred, and still she dragged him forward, refusing to let go. When they reached the edge of the fallen beam, she hesitated, calculating the narrow space between the debris and the spreading flames. There was barely enough room to get through, and not enough time to think. She shifted her grip, taking a deeper breath than her lungs could handle, and forced herself forward, ducking low. As she pulled him through the gap, the heat seared against her back, and for a moment she thought they would not make it. But then suddenly they were through, collapsing into the hallway, where the air felt just slightly less deadly. Lily gasped, pulling in what breath she could, her entire body trembling as she tried to gather enough strength to keep moving. But Ethan was still unconscious, still silent, and the fire was still chasing them down the corridor step by step. She dragged him toward the exit, each movement slower than the last, until finally, through the haze of smoke, she saw the faint outline of the front doors and the flashing lights beyond. Voices shouted from outside, distant, urgent, calling for anyone still inside. Lily focused on that sound, on the idea of escape, of survival, and with the last strength she had left, she pulled him forward, refusing to stop until they crossed the threshold into the cold night air, where everything changed in an instant. Hands reached for them, pulling Ethan away from her as paramedics rushed in, their voices sharp and controlled, and Lily collapsed onto the gravel, coughing violently, her body finally giving in to exhaustion as the world around her blurred into sirens and flashing red lights. And somewhere in the chaos, someone shouted that he was alive, but Lily did not hear it, because for the first time since she ran back into the fire, everything went dark. The first thing Lily felt was the weight of silence, thick and heavy, pressing against her senses. Before the pain came sharp and immediate, spreading through her chest. With every shallow breath she tried to take somewhere nearby, a steady beeping sound echoed, slow and rhythmic, pulling her back from the darkness. She had fallen, and her eyes fluttered open to a blur of white lights and unfamiliar shapes. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air, and for a moment she did not remember where she was or how she got there, until the memory hit her all at once. Fire, smoke, heat, and the man she had dragged through it. Lily tried to move, but a sharp sting shot through her arm, stopping her. A soft voice spoke gently from her side. "Easy now, you are in the hospital. You made it." Lily turned her head slightly, her vision still unsteady, as she saw a nurse adjusting the line connected to her arm. "How long?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The nurse gave a small, reassuring smile. "A few hours. You inhaled a lot of smoke, but you were stable. You were very lucky." Lily closed her eyes for a second, letting that sink in. Lucky, the word felt distant, almost unreal compared to what she remembered. Then her eyes opened again, sudden urgency pushing through the fog. "The man," she said, struggling to form the words. "Is he alive?" The nurse paused just long enough for Lily to feel her heart tighten before answering. "Yes, he is alive. He was unconscious when they brought him in, but his condition is improving." Lily exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her body in a quiet release she did not realize she needed. For a moment, everything inside her went still. Not relief exactly, but something close to it, something quieter, deeper, knowing that the choice she made had not ended in death. Footsteps approached outside the room, firm, controlled, and purposeful, and the nurse stepped aside as someone entered. Lily turned her head again, slower this time, and saw him. Ethan Cole stood in the doorway, not in the tailored suit she was used to seeing, but in simple hospital clothing, his arm wrapped in a temporary brace, faint marks of smoke still visible along his jaw. For the first time since she had known him, he looked different, not powerful, not untouchable, just a man who had almost died. Their eyes met, and the room seemed to shift around them. Lily expected the same cold distance, the same dismissive glance. But it did not come. Instead, there was something else in his expression, something unsettled, uncertain, as if he did not quite understand what he was looking at. "You woke up," he said, his voice lower than she had ever heard it before. Lily blinked, once processing the words before answering. "I guess I did." There was a pause, an unfamiliar kind of silence stretching between them, neither of them moving, neither of them looking away. Ethan took a step closer, then another, stopping just short of her bed. The faint sound of the heart monitor filled the space between them. "You should not have gone back in there," he said finally, the words measured but lacking the sharp edge. She remembered Lily studied him for a moment, her gaze steady despite the weakness in her body. someone had as she replied. Simply Ethan looked at her, as if the answer unsettled him more than anything else, as if he had expected anger or accusation or at least some demand for recognition, but there was none, just quiet truth hanging in the air. He ran a hand slowly through his hair, a gesture that felt out of place for someone like him. I do not remember everything, he admitted, his voice tightening slightly. But I remember enough. I remember you, Lily said, nothing waiting, and for the first time Ethan Cole seemed to hesitate, searching for words that did not come easily to him. You saved my life, he said at last, the statement direct, but carrying a weight that went beyond simple acknowledgement. Lily let out a soft breath, her eyes drifting for a second before returning to him. I did what anyone would do, she said, though even as she spoke the words, both of them knew it was not true. Ethan shook his head once. Quietly, no, not anyone. The room fell silent again. But this time, it was different, no longer empty, but filled with something unspoken, something shifting beneath the surface of everything they had been before. And as Ethan stood there looking at the woman he had once treated as invisible, he began to realize that the world he thought he understood was no longer the same. The days that followed did not feel real to Lily. They passed in a quiet blur of white walls, soft footsteps, and the steady rhythm of machines that reminded her she was still here, still breathing, still alive. Each morning a nurse would check her lungs, each afternoon a doctor would ask the same careful questions, and each night the silence would settle in, heavy and unfamiliar. She was not used to being still, not used to being taken care of. Her life had always been movement, work, survival, and now she lay in a hospital bed with nothing but time and her own thoughts. And those thoughts kept drifting back to the same moment, the fire, the heat, and the look in Ethan Cole's eyes when he realized what pulled him out on the third day. She was able to sit up on her own, the ache in her chest still sharp, but manageable. Sunlight filtered through the window, casting a soft glow across the room, and for the first time she noticed something different. There were flowers on the small table beside her bed, fresh white lilies arranged carefully in a glass vase. She frowned slightly. She had no family nearby, no friends who knew where she was, which meant there was only one person who could have sent them. As if on cue, the door opened, and Ethan stepped inside. He paused for a moment, as if unsure whether to enter, then closed the door quietly behind him. You're sitting up, he said, his voice calm, but carrying a trace of something unfamiliar, relief. Perhaps. Lily glanced at the flowers, then back at him. You sent those? He nodded, stepping closer. I was not sure what you liked. She looked at the arrangement again, her expression softening just slightly. They're nice, thank you. The words felt simple but sincere, and for a brief moment neither of them spoke. Ethan moved to stand near the foot of the bed, his posture less rigid than before, his usual sharp control replaced by something quieter. I spoke with the doctors, he said. They told me what happened, how much smoke you inhaled, how close it was. Lily gave a small shrug, trying to dismiss the weight of it. I'm still here. That is what matters. Ethan studied her for a second longer, as if that answer was not enough, as if there was more he needed to understand. You should not have had to risk your life like that, he said, his tone tightening slightly. Not for me. Lily met his gaze directly, her eyes clear and steady. It was not about you, she said, and the honesty in her voice seemed to catch him off guard. She continued after a brief pause. It was about not leaving someone behind. Ethan looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening as those words settled into him, because that was exactly what he had done so many times before in different ways with different people. He had left them behind, dismissed them, overlooked them, treated them as if they did not matter. And yet she had gone back for him. A silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them had said before. Ethan exhaled slowly, as if forcing himself to speak. I have arranged for all your medical bills to be covered, he said, and when you are discharged, you will not need to return to work until you are fully recovered. Lily's expression shifted slightly, not anger, not gratitude, something more cautious. I did not do it for that, she replied. I know, Ethan said quickly, almost too quickly, then more quietly. I know, that is why it matters. Lily looked at him more carefully, now noticing the difference, not just in his words, but in the way he carried them. There was no arrogance, no assumption, only a kind of quiet urgency, as if he were trying to step into a role he had never played before. You keep saying that, she said softly. Matters. Ethan held her gaze this time. Because it does. You matter. The words hung in the air, simple and direct, but heavier than anything he had ever said to her before. Lily felt something tighten in her chest, not pain, but something else, something unfamiliar. She had spent so long being invisible that hearing those words felt almost unreal. She looked away briefly, then back at him, still uncertain what to do with what he was offering. "I do not need anything from you," she said, finally, her voice calm but firm. Ethan nodded once slowly, as if he expected that answer. "I am not offering you something you need," he said. "I am trying to do something should have done a long time ago." Lily did not respond right away. Instead, she studied him, searching for any sign that this was temporary, that he would return to the man he had been before. But what she saw unsettled her more than anything else: sincerity. And as the silence settled again between them, Lily realized that the fire had not only changed what happened that night, it had changed something inside both of them, and neither of them yet knew what that would mean. The hospital room grew quieter with each passing day, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt watchful, as if something unseen was slowly shifting into place. Lily noticed it in the way the nurses spoke to her, with a little more warmth, in the way the doctors lingered a second longer when checking her charts, and most of all in the way Ethan kept returning, not out of obligation, but with a consistency that felt deliberate. The first time he came back after that conversation, he brought nothing, just stood near the door, as if unsure whether he was welcome. The second time he asked if she needed anything. The third time he stayed long enough to sit down, and now nearly a week had passed, and his presence had become part of the rhythm of her recovery. On that morning, the sky outside was clear, the pale winter light stretching across the floor as Lily slowly swung her legs over the side of the bed, testing her strength. The ache was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She stood carefully, one hand gripping the edge of the table, steadying herself as she took a cautious step forward. Then another. "You should not be walking alone." Ethan's voice came from the doorway, calm but carrying a quiet concern. Lily glanced over her shoulder, not startled this time, just aware. "I am not alone," she said lightly. "I am right here," he replied, stepping inside, but he did not move closer immediately. Instead, he watched her, as if measuring something, not her strength, but her determination. Lily took another step, then stopped, turning to face him. "I cannot stay in that bed forever," she said. "I know," Ethan answered, and after a brief pause he added, "That is not what I meant." There was a moment of silence between them, not uncomfortable, just unfinished. Lily lowered herself back onto the edge of the bed, her breathing slightly heavier than before, and for a second she closed her eyes, gathering herself. When she opened them again, Ethan was closer, now, not imposing, not controlling, just present. "You're getting stronger," he said. Lily gave a small nod. "I have to." There was something in the way she said it that made Ethan pause, something that carried weight beyond the simple words. "Why?" he asked before he could stop himself. Lily hesitated, not because she did not have an answer, but because she was not used to giving it. She looked down at her hands resting in her lap, her fingers still faintly marked by the burns. "I send money every month," she said quietly. Ethan frowned slightly. "To who?" she exhaled slowly, choosing her words carefully. "My younger brother. He is in a care facility in Pennsylvania. He has a heart condition, and the treatments are not something we can afford without help." The room seemed to still around them as the meaning settled, and Ethan said nothing, allowing her to continue. "He is 12 years old," Lily added, her voice soft but steady, "and he thinks I work in a nice place where people treat me." While she let out a faint breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. "I never corrected him." Ethan felt something shift sharply inside his chest, a discomfort deeper than guilt, something closer to recognition. "You stayed in that job because of him," he said, more to himself than to her. Lily nodded once, simply yes. There was no self-pity in her tone, no bitterness, just truth laid out plainly, and that made it harder to ignore, harder to dismiss. Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her, not as an employee, not as someone beneath him, but as a person carrying something he had never bothered to see before. "I did not know," he said finally. Lily met his gaze. "You never asked," she replied, not accusing, just stating a fact. The words lingered between them, heavier than any argument could have been. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly, then looked back at her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it before. "You should not have had to choose between dignity and survival," he said. Lily tilted her head slightly, considering that. "Maybe, but sometimes those are the only choices people get." Ethan did not respond right away because he knew she was right, and that truth did not just exist somewhere far away. It existed in his house, in his company, in the way he had built his world, a world where people like Lily carried burdens he never noticed and still showed up every day. Without complaint, I want to help, he said. Quietly, Lily's expression changed, just a little, not softening, not rejecting. Just careful, you already did, she said. You cover the hospital bills. That is more than enough. Ethan shook his head slowly. That is not what I mean. Lily watched him closely now, sensing the difference, sensing that this was not about obligation or repayment anymore. It was something else, something deeper, something that had begun the moment she chose to walk back into the fire. And as the silence settled, once more she realized that whatever was happening between them was no longer about what had been lost in that fire, but about what was beginning to grow in its place the day Lily was discharged from the hospital. Arrived with a quiet sense of finality, the kind that did not announce itself loudly, but settled in slowly like the first breath of cold air before winter truly began. She stood near the window of her room, dressed in simple clothes provided by the hospital, her movements careful, but steady, the bandages on her arms lighter. Now her breathing, no longer strained outside the city, moved on, as it always did, cars passing, people walking, lives continuing, as if nothing had happened. But for Lily, everything had changed. Behind her the door opened, and she did not need to turn. No, it was him. You're leaving today, Ethan said, his voice calm, but carrying something beneath it. Lily nodded, her eyes still on the world outside. Yes, the doctor said. I am ready. Ethan stepped further into the room, holding a small envelope in his hand. Not large, not extravagant, just plain, but deliberate. Lily turned, then her gaze dropping briefly to it before returning to his face. What is that? She asked. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second, then extended it toward her. It is information about your brother, his treatment, his condition, the facility he is in. Lily's expression sharpened immediately, her body tensing in a way it had not since before the fire. How do you know about that? She asked, her voice no longer soft but guarded. Ethan did not look away. You told me enough, and I had my team find a rest. Lily did not take the envelope. Her hands remained at her sides. I did not ask you to do that, she said, and this time there was a clear edge in her tone. I know, Ethan replied, but I asked myself what it would mean if I did nothing again. The word again hung between them, heavier than either of them expected. Lily looked at him, searching for something, control, manipulation, anything that felt familiar, but what she saw unsettled her. Instead, honesty without defense. I reviewed his case, Ethan continued carefully. The treatment he is receiving is not what it could be. There are better options, specialized care programs that could improve his condition significantly. Lily's breath caught slightly despite herself, and she forced it steady. Those programs cost more than I make in years, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. Yes, they do, and that is why I have already arranged for him to be transferred. Lily shook her head immediately. No, you cannot do that. You do not get to make decisions like that for my family. Ethan took a step closer, not imposing, but firm. I am not making the decision for you, he said. I'm giving you the choice you should have had all along. Lily's eyes dropped to the envelope again, then back to him, her emotions shifting too quickly to name. This is too much, she said. It is not too much, Ethan replied. It is what should have been possible. From the start, there was a silence that followed, not empty, but filled with tension. Lily's mind racing through everything this meant: help, security, hope, things she had learned not to trust because they always came with a price. What do you want from me? She asked finally, her voice low and steady. Ethan did not hesitate. Nothing. The answer came too quickly, too clearly, and that alone made her doubt it. Nothing, she repeated. You expect me to believe that? Ethan exhaled slowly, as if choosing his words with more care than he ever had before. I expect you to believe that I am trying to fix something that should never have been broken. Lily looked at him for a long moment. The room quiet around them, the weight of the envelope now heavier than anything physical she had carried before. If I take this, she said slowly, I am not coming back to work for you. Ethan nodded. Once I know. Lily's brow furrowed slightly. Then why are you doing this? Because you would have done it for someone else, Ethan said without hesitation, and that truth settled into the space between them, undeniable. Lily felt something shift inside her again, not trust, not yet, but something that moved in that direction. Carefully, uncertainly, she reached out and took the envelope, her fingers brushing his for just a second before pulling back, the contact brief, but enough to change the air between them. Thank you, she said, the words quiet but real. Ethan did not respond immediately. He simply watched her, as if committing that moment to memory, as if understanding that whatever happened next would not be something he could control. Lily picked up her small bag turning toward the door, her steps steady now stronger than before, and as she walked past him, she paused just slightly, not enough to face him, but enough to speak. "I will let you know what I decide," she said. Ethan nodded, even though she could not see him. "That is all I ask." And as Lily Carter walked out of the hospital into a world that suddenly held possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine, Ethan Cole stood in the silence behind her, realizing that for the first time in his life, he had given something without expecting anything in return, and that felt more unfamiliar than anything else he had ever known. The drive to Pennsylvania took just over 3 hours, but for Lily, it felt longer, not because of the distance, but because of the weight of the decision sitting quietly beside her in the passenger seat. The envelope Ethan had given her rested unopened for most of the journey, as if touching it too soon might make everything too real, too fast. The highway stretched ahead in long, steady lines, the winter trees bare against a pale sky, and for the first time in a long time, Lily was not rushing to survive. She was driving towards something uncertain, something that felt like hope, and she did not yet know how to trust it when she finally pulled into the care facility. The building stood modest but clean, its brick walls worn, but maintained a place that did its best with what it had. Lily sat in the car for a moment, her hands resting on the steering wheel, her breath steadying. Before she reached for the envelope this time, she opened it slowly. Inside were detailed reports, medical evaluations, recommendations for advanced treatment programs, and at the very top, a letter already prepared outlining a full transfer to a specialized cardiac center, one of the best in the state. Fully covered, Lily stared at the page, her vision blurring slightly as the reality settled in. This was not a suggestion. This was a door that had already been opened. All she had to do was walk through it. A soft knock on her window startled her, and she looked up to see a nurse smiling gently through the glass. Lily stepped out of the car, the cold air brushing against her face. As the nurse greeted her, "He has been asking about you all morning," she said. Lily nodded, her throat tightening slightly as she followed her inside. The familiar smell of the facility wrapped around her, the quiet hum of machines, the distant murmur of voices. And then she saw him. Daniel sat propped up in his bed, a thin blanket draped over his legs, a small frame still, but his eyes bright when they landed on her. "Lily, you came," he said, his voice soft but full of warmth. Lily crossed the room, quickly kneeling beside him and wrapping her arms carefully around him. "I always come," she whispered into his shoulder, pulling back just enough to look at him. "You look stronger." He shrugged slightly, trying to appear braver than he felt. "I feel okay today," he said, then studied her more closely. "You look different." Lily hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I had a little accident, but I'm fine." His expression shifted with concern. "Did it hurt?" "A little," she admitted, "but I am okay now." Daniel nodded, slowly accepting that answer the way children do when they sense there is more, but choose not to push. Lily reached in her bag, pulling out the envelope and placing it gently on the bed beside him. "I want to show you something," she said. Daniel glanced at it, then back at her. "What is it?" Lily took a breath, steadying herself. "This is a chance for you to get better, real treatment, the kind we have been hoping for." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "Is it real?" She nodded. "Yes, it is real, and it is already arranged. We just have to say yes." He looked down at the papers, his small hands brushing over them, as if trying to understand something far bigger than himself. "How did you do this?" he asked. Lily paused, the question settling deeper than she expected, because the truth was complicated, because it was not just about money or connections. It was about a moment, a choice of fire she could not explain in simple words. "Someone helped me," she said finally, "someone who did not have to." Daniel looked back up at her, his expression thoughtful. Then he smiled, a quiet, hopeful smile that made everything feel worth it. "Are you going to say yes?" Lily felt her chest tighten again, not with fear, but with the weight of possibility. She glanced at the papers, then back at him, and for the first time the answer felt clear. "Yes," she said softly. "I think I am." Daniel's smile grew wider, and in that moment the future felt closer than it ever had before. Later, as Lily stepped outside into the cold afternoon air, she pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering for just a second before she dialed the number. It rang once, twice, then his voice came through, calm and steady. "Hello." Lily closed her eyes briefly, then spoke. "I read everything." There was a pause on the other end, not long, but enough to feel. "In your decision?" he asked. Lily looked out across the quiet parking lot, the winter light fading slowly as she took a breath. "I am saying yes," she said, and as the words left her lips, she realized that this was not just about accepting help, it was about stepping into a life she had never allowed herself to imagine. And somewhere miles away, Ethan Cole stood in silence, listening to her answer, understanding that the choice she had just made would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could yet see. The transition into Ethan Cole's world did not happen all at once. It unfolded slowly in careful steps, as if both of them understood that forcing it would break something. Fragile Lily arrived at the new cardiac center in Pennsylvania. Early the next morning, Daniel's transfer had already been arranged with precision, every detail handled. Before she even stepped through the doors, the facility was nothing like the one before. The halls were brighter, the equipment more advanced, the staff moving with a confidence that came from experience and resources. Lily walked beside Daniel as he was guided into his new room, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder as if grounding. "Both of them, this is nice," he whispered, looking around with wide eyes. Lily nodded, swallowing the emotion rising in her chest. Yes, it is. Later that afternoon, she stood alone near the window of the waiting area, watching as doctors reviewed Daniel's charts through a glass partition, their expressions focused, serious, but not worried. And that alone felt like a victory. "You made the right choice." Ethan's voice came from behind her, steady, familiar, but still carrying that quiet distance. She turned slightly. Not surprised anymore. He had told her he would come just to make sure everything went smoothly, and he had kept that promise. "I did not make it alone," she replied. Ethan stepped beside her, his gaze following hers toward the room where Daniel now rested. "You did," he said. "I only opened a door. You walked through it." Lily considered that for a moment, then nodded, accepting it without argument, because for the first time in her life, someone had given her an opportunity without taking anything in return, and she had chosen to accept it. The two of them stood in silence, watching through the glass as a nurse adjusted Daniel's blanket and spoke to him gently. After a moment, Lily turned toward Ethan. "I do not belong here," she said quietly, the words not bitter, just honest. Ethan looked at her, his expression steady. "Why do you say that?" Lily gestured slightly around them. "Everything here feels different, like it is not meant for people like me." Ethan shook his head once, then met her gaze directly. "Places are not meant for people," he said. "People make places what they're." Lily studied him, searching for the certainty behind those words. And for once she did not find arrogance, only belief. "Then why does it feel like I'm stepping into something that could disappear at any moment?" she asked. Ethan paused, considering her question. "Because you have spent your whole life expecting it to," he answered. Simply the truth of it settled between them, and Lily did not argue. Because he was right. Hope had always felt temporary, something that could be taken away as quickly as it appeared. Ethan shifted slightly, his posture less guarded than before. "I want you to come back with me," he said. Lily frowned slightly, not understanding. "Back where to New York?" he clarified. "To the company." There was a moment of silence as the meaning of his words began to form. "You want me to work there?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Not as a maid, not as someone invisible," he added quickly. "I want you to be part of something different, something that actually helps people." Lily's eyes narrowed, slightly cautious again. "What does that mean?" Ethan took a breath, as if choosing his words carefully. "It means I am changing things, the way the company operates, the way we treat people, the way we use what we have. And I want someone there who understands what it feels like to be overlooked, someone who will not let me forget." Lily looked at him more closely now, her mind moving through the layers of what he was asking. This was not just a job. It was a shift in everything, a step into a world she had only seen from the outside. "Why me?" she asked. Ethan did not hesitate. "Because you'll tell me the truth, even when I do not want to hear it." Lily let out a small breath, the corner of her mouth lifting just slightly. "That sounds like a risky decision," Ethan allowed a faint hint of a smile. "Then maybe I need to start making better risks." The lightness of the moment faded as quickly as it came, leaving behind something more serious, something that carried weight. Lily looked back through the glass at Daniel, then back at Ethan. "I will not be your project," she said firmly. "I know," he replied. "I am asking you to be my partner in fixing what I broke." The word partner lingered in the air, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. Lily felt something shift inside her again, not fear, not doubt, but something closer to possibility. And as she stood there between the life she had known and the one now opening in front of her, she realized that the choice she had made was only the beginning of a much larger change, one that neither of them could walk away from anymore. The first day Lily walked into Ethan Cole's company, she felt every step more than the last. Not because the floor beneath her feet was unfamiliar, but because everything around her carried a weight she had never been invited to carry before the glass doors opened silently as she entered the lobby of the space. Wide and polished sunlight reflecting off marble floors and towering windows, people moved with purpose, voices, low, controlled conversations flowing around her in a rhythm she did not yet belong to. She paused for just a second, taking it in, then kept walking, her posture straight, her pace steady, even as her heart beat just a little faster. This was not the house she had once cleaned quietly in the background. This was something else entirely, a world that had always existed above her, not beside her. Miss Carter, a voice called from the reception desk. A woman in a tailored suit offered a polite smile. Mr. Cole is expecting you. Lily nodded, returning the gesture as she approached. Thank you. The elevator ride felt longer than it was, each floor rising, carrying her further into a space that had once been closed to her. When the doors opened, she stepped into a different kind of silence, not empty, but focused. The executive floor was quieter, more controlled, as if every sound had intention. Ethan stood near the glass wall of his office, his back to her ass. He looked out over the city skyline. When he turned, his expression shifted slightly, not surprise, not relief, but recognition. You came, he said. Lily stepped inside, stopping just short of his desk. I said I would. There was no hesitation in her voice, only quiet certainty. Ethan nodded once, as if that alone confirmed something he needed to believe. I want to show you something, he said, gesturing toward the conference room beyond the glass. Lily followed him inside, where several people already sat, waiting, their eyes turning toward her as she entered, some curious, some skeptical, some clearly uncertain. This is Lily Carter, Ethan said, his voice calm but carrying authority. She will be working with us on a new initiative focused on employee welfare and community outreach. A brief silence followed, the kind that filled a room when expectations were disrupted. One of the men seated at the table leaned back slightly, his expression controlled but edged with doubt. With all due respect, he began, what qualifies her for that role? Lily felt the shift immediately, the familiar undercurrent of judgment, something she had known her entire life, but this time she did not lower her gaze. She did not shrink. She simply waited. Ethan did not look at the man right away. Instead, he looked at Lily, then back at the room. What qualifies her, he repeated slowly, is that she understands something none of us ever had to learn the hard way. The man frowned slightly. And what exactly is that? Ethan's voice did not rise, but it carried through the room with quiet force. What it means to be ignored, to be dismissed, to be treated as if you do not matter and still show up every single day anyway. The room fell silent again, but this time it was different, not dismissive, but attentive. Lily felt something shift inside her, not validation, not yet, but something close to it. Ethan continued, his gaze steady. If we are serious about changing this company, then we need someone who sees what we have refused to see for too long. There were no more immediate objections, but the tension did not disappear. It settled into something quieter, something that would take time to break down. After the meeting ended, people filtered out slowly, some offering polite nods, others avoiding her gaze entirely. Lily remained where she was, her thoughts steady. Despite everything, you handled that well, Ethan said from behind her. Lily turned slightly. I have had practice, she replied. Ethan allowed a small breath that might have been a quiet acknowledgement. I do not expect this to be easy, he said. Lily met his gaze. I did not expect it to be either. There was a pause, then she added, but I did not come here because it was easy. I came because it matters. Ethan nodded once. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, not an agreement, not yet, but an understanding that whatever this was becoming, it would not be built on comfort, it would be built on truth. And as Lily Carter stood in a place that had once been far beyond her reach, she realized that she was no longer just stepping into a new world. She was beginning to change it from the inside. The shift did not come as an open challenge. It came quietly, the kind of resistance that did not announce itself, but worked beneath the surface, spreading through conversations, lowered voices, and subtle glances that lingered just a second too long. Lily felt it in the days that followed her first meeting, not in anything direct, but in what was left unsaid. Emails that excluded her from discussions, meetings that were scheduled without her knowledge, polite smiles that carried no warmth. She had seen this before, just in a different form back then. It had been open dismissal now. It was something more refined, more controlled, but no less real. One afternoon, she sat at her desk reviewing a proposal for employee support programs, her pen moving steadily across the page, making notes, adjusting details, shaping something that could actually work when two voices drifted from the hallway just outside her office door. They were not loud, but they were not careful either. She should not be here, one of them said. This is not her world, the other voice responded, lower, but sharper. She is only here because of him. Give it time. She will not last. Lily did not move. She did not react outwardly, but her hand paused for just a second before continuing, as if the words had not reached her at all. Later that day, Ethan called for company-wide meeting. The room filled quickly. Executives, managers, employees from multiple departments all gathered with a sense of anticipation that had been building for days. Lily stood near the back, at first observing the space, the people, the tension that seemed to hum beneath the surface. Ethan stepped forward once everyone had settled, his presence commanding as always. But there was something different now, something less distant. We need to address something directly. He began, his voice steady, carrying through the room. I am aware that there are concerns about recent changes, about new roles, new priorities, and new leadership directions. A few people shifted in their seats, but no one spoke. Ethan continued, I am also aware that some of those concerns are not about the changes themselves, but about who is leading them. His gaze moved through the room, not stopping on anyone, but not avoiding anyone either. Lily stepped forward, and not because she was asked to, but because she understood that this moment was not just as it was hers as well. You could say she said, her voice calm but clear. The room turned toward her, now fully attentive, some surprised, some uncomfortable, some curious. You do not think I belong here, she continued, and that is fair, because a few months ago I would have agreed with you. A ripple of quiet movement passed through the room. Lily did not rush. She did not soften her words. She let them stand. I cleaned offices like this one, she said. I stood in rooms like this without anyone noticing. I heard what people say when they think you are invisible, and I learned something from that. She paused just long enough for the silence to settle. People do not speak differently because they are in a different position. They speak differently because they think no one is listening. Ethan watched her closely, not interrupting, not stepping in. This was her moment. Lily continued, her gaze steady across the room. I'm not here because I know everything about business, she said. I am here because I know what it feels like when a system forgets the people who keep it running. And if that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe that is something worth paying attention to. The silence that followed was not the same as before. It was heavier, more grounded, as if something had shifted beneath the surface. When the senior managers leaned forward slightly, his expression no longer dismissive but thoughtful. So what happens now? He asked. Lily met his gaze. Now we listen, she said, and we fix what we have been ignoring. Ethan stepped forward then, not to take over, but to stand beside her from this point forward. He said, his voice firm, this is not just an initiative, it is a standard, and it will apply to everyone, including me. The room remained quiet, but the tension had changed. It was no longer resistance. It was uncertainty, something that could still turn either way. As the meeting ended, people began to move again, slower this time, more thoughtful than before. Lily remained where she was, her breathing steady, her posture unchanged. You knew that was coming, Ethan said quietly beside her. Lily nodded. I have been expecting it my whole life. Ethan glanced at her, then back at the room that was now beginning to shift in ways he had never seen before, and for the first time he understood that change was not something he could order. It was something that had to be faced. And as Lily Carter stood in the center of that moment, she was no longer the person who had once been ignored. She was the one forcing everyone else to finally see the days after. The meeting did not settle into calm. They sharpened into something more defined. The quiet resistance that once moved in whispers now began to surface in clearer forms, not open defiance, but calculated pressure. Reports, delayed approvals, questioned decisions, re-examined. Lily saw it for what it was, not a rejection of her ideas, but a test of whether she would hold her ground or step back into the space they believed she belonged in. One evening, long after most of the office had emptied, she remained at her desk reviewing a series of internal complaints, her eyes moving carefully across each line, patterns forming in her mind as she connected details others might have ignored. The door behind her opened softly, and Ethan stepped inside, his jacket draped over his arm. You're still here, he said. Lily did not look up immediately, just finishing a line she was reading before setting the paper down. Someone Needs to be, she replied. Ethan moved closer, glancing at the documents spread across her desk. What is all this? He asked. Lily turned slightly toward him. These are employee reports, complaints that were filed months ago, some even years, but never addressed. Ethan's expression tightened. Why not? Lily met his gaze. Because they came from people no one thought were important enough to listen to. The words landed heavily. Ethan picked up one of the reports, scanning it quickly, his jaw setting as he read this. It should have been handled, he said quietly. Lily nodded. It should have been, but it was not. And that is the problem. There was a pause as Ethan processed that. Then he set the paper down, looking at her more directly. You are pushing hard, he said, not as a warning, but as an observation. Lily held his gaze. I am doing what you asked me to do. Ethan exhaled slowly. I know, but I need to understand how far you're willing to take this. Lily did not hesitate all the way. The answer came without doubt, and that was what unsettled him, not because he disagreed, but because he realized she meant it completely. There was no compromise in her when it came to this, no willingness to soften the truth, to make it easier for others to accept. You're going to face more than resistance, he said quietly. Lily gave a faint nod. I already am. Ethan studied her for a moment, then asked the question that had been forming since the meeting. Why did you really come here? Lily's expression shifted slightly, not defensive, but thoughtful. Because I spent too long surviving in a system that did not care if I existed, she said. And now I have the chance to make sure someone else does not have to. Ethan looked at her in silence, the simplicity of her answer carrying more weight than anything else in the room. And in that moment he understood that this was not about a job for her. It was not about opportunity or even gratitude. It was about something deeper, something rooted in every experience she had carried with her long before she ever walked into his house or his company. The next morning the pressure came openly. His senior executive requested a formal review of the new initiatives, questioning their impact, their cost, and their necessity. The meeting was scheduled quickly, and the tone was clear. This was not discussion, this was confrontation. Lily entered the room beside Ethan, her posture steady, her expression composed as several executives waited, their faces set with quiet determination. One of them spoke first. These changes are moving too fast, he said. They're disrupting established systems and creating unnecessary instability. Lily did not respond immediately. She let the words settle, then answered calmly, what you're calling instability is actually accountability. The man leaned forward slightly, his tone sharpening. You are asking this company to change its entire structure based on perspective, not data. Lily met his gaze without hesitation. I am asking this company to acknowledge data it has been ignoring for years. Ethan remained silent. Beside her, not because he had nothing to say, but because he understood that this moment was not his to lead, it was hers. The room grew tense, the air heavier with every exchange, until finally the same executive spoke again. This is not how this company has ever operated. Lily's voice remained steady as she responded. Then maybe that is exactly why it needs to change. The words settled into the room, final, undeniable, and for a moment no one spoke, because they all understood that this was no longer a question of policy. It was a question of direction, and as Lily Carter stood firm in that space, refusing to step back, refusing to make herself smaller, Ethan Cole realized that the transformation he had started was no longer his to control. It had become something far more powerful, something that would either reshape everything or be forced out entirely. And for the first time, he knew he was no longer leading the change he was following. The turning point did not come quietly. It came in front of everyone under bright lights and careful attention. The company had scheduled a public forum, a rare event, where leadership addressed both employees and selected media partners, a moment meant to reassure investors, stabilize confidence, and present a clear direction for the future. But beneath the polished surface, there was tension, the kind that could not be hidden by prepared statements or rehearsed speeches. Lily stood just off stage, watching as executives reviewed final notes, their voices controlled but their eyes uncertain. This was no longer a routine appearance. This was a test of everything that had been set in motion. Ethan stood near the podium, his expression composed, but different from the man he had been before the fire. There was no distance in him now, no separation between what he said and what he carried. Lily, you do not have to stand up there if you do not want to, he said quietly without turning. Lily shook her head. I am not here to stay comfortable, she replied. I am here To make sure this means something, Ethan glanced at her, then gave a small nod, understanding that whatever happened next would not belong to him alone. The room beyond the stage filled quickly, rows of employees, journalists, and stakeholders, all waiting for answers. The lights dimmed slightly, and then Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady as he began. Today is not about presenting a perfect image, he said. It is about facing what we have ignored for too long. A ripple moved through the audience, some shifting, some leaning forward, listening more closely. Ethan continued, for years this company has been successful by every external measure, but success without accountability is not something I am willing to stand behind anymore. A pause followed. Then he did something no one expected. He stepped back and turned toward Lily. She will explain why. Lily felt the weight of every eye in the room as she walked forward, each step deliberate, each breath measured. This was not a place she had ever imagined standing, but she did not hesitate when she reached the podium. She looked out across the room, not searching for approval, not avoiding judgment, just seeing people. I used to work in places like this without anyone noticing me. She began, her voice clear, carrying through the space. I heard conversations, decisions, assumptions about people who were never asked what they needed. She paused, letting the silence hold. I was one of those people, and I am not the only one. The room was still, now fully attentive. Lily continued, this company has the ability to change lives, not just through profit, but through how it treats the people inside it. That means listening to those who have been ignored, addressing problems that have been pushed aside, and making sure no one is invisible just because their position says they should be. She stepped back, slightly, not as a retreat, but as a shift, allowing Ethan to return beside her. He did not take the spotlight back. Instead, he stood with her, not above her. From this moment forward, he said, every policy, every decision, every part of this company will be measured by one standard. Does it respect the people who make it possible? A reporter in the front row raised a hand quickly. Are you saying the previous leadership failed in that regard? Ethan did not hesitate. Yes, he said simply, and I was part of that failure. The honesty in his voice broke something open in the room. The tension shifted, no longer defensive, but reflective. Another voice followed. What guarantees do you have that this will not just be temporary? Ethan looked toward Lily briefly, then back at the audience. No guarantees, he said. Only accountability, and that starts with us. There was no applause at first, just silence, the kind that comes when something real has been said. Then slowly it began, not loud, not overwhelming, but steady, growing as more people joined, until the room filled with a sound that felt less like approval and more like recognition. Lily stood there beside Ethan, feeling the moment settle into something permanent, not because it was easy, not because it was finished, but because it had finally begun. And as the lights held and the voices continued, she realized that this was the moment where everything shifted from intention into action, and there was no going back. The changes did not happen overnight, but they happened steadily, and that was enough. The weeks that followed the public forum brought a different kind of movement through the company, not loud, not dramatic, but real. Policies were rewritten, departments reevaluated, systems that had once ignored people were forced to acknowledge them, and for the first time, employees who had remained silent began to speak, not because they were told to, but because they believed someone would finally listen. Lily walked through the same halls she once would have cleaned in silence, but now people greeted her, some with gratitude, some with respect, and some still with uncertainty, but none without awareness. And that alone marked a shift that could not be undone. Ethan watched it all, not from a distance, but within it, attending meetings, listening more than speaking, allowing change to unfold even when it challenged him. And there were moments when it did, late nights when decisions were not clear, when resistance returned in new forms, when the weight of everything he had been confronted, everything he was trying to become. But each time he did not step back, he stepped forward differently, more aware, more willing to be accountable. One afternoon, Lily stood outside the cardiac center, once again the air warmer, now the winter edge gone, replaced by the quiet beginning of spring. She held her phone in one hand, her expression softer than it had been months earlier. Behind her, the doors opened, and Daniel stepped out carefully, his steps stronger, his face carrying a color it had not held before. Lily turned immediately, her eyes lighting up. You were supposed to take it slow, she said, but her voice carried no real warning, only relief. Daniel smiled slightly. I'm taking it slow. This is slow. For me, Lily laughed softly, the sound light and real. And for a moment, everything felt simple, just a sister and her brother standing in a place that once felt unreachable. How do you feel? She asked. Daniel shrugged, but his smile remained better. He said, really better. Lily nodded, her eyes shining just a little as she reached out, brushing a hand through his hair. That is all I wanted. Daniel looked at her, then tilted his head slightly. You look different too, he said. Lily raised an eyebrow. Different? How? Happier, he answered simply, and this time she did not try to deny it. Later that evening, Lily returned to New York, the city moving around her with its usual rhythm, but she no longer felt like she was trying to keep up with it. She felt like she belonged within it. When she stepped into the company building, the lights were dim, most of the offices empty, except for one she already knew would be occupied. Ethan stood near the window, once again the same place where so much had begun, but he turned as soon as he heard her footsteps. You want to see him, he said. Lily nodded. He is doing well. There was a pause. Then she added, thank you. Ethan shook his head slightly. You already said that. Lily stepped closer, stopping a few feet away from him. I'm saying it again, because I mean it differently now. Ethan looked at her more closely, as if trying to understand what had changed. And what is different? He asked. Lily took a breath, steady and sure before answering. Before it felt like I owed you something, she said. Now it feels like we chose something together. The words settled between them, quiet but certain. Ethan let out a slow breath, something in his expression softening in a way that had nothing to do with control and everything to do with trust. One spent a long time thinking strength meant not needing anyone, he said. Lily met his gaze, and now I know it means choosing who matters. He finished. The space between them no longer carried distance. It carried something else, something earned, not given. Lily smiled faintly, then more fully, a warmth that had taken time to reach this moment. What happens next? She asked. Ethan did not answer right away. He stepped closer, not rushed, not uncertain, just present. We keep going, he said. We keep building something that actually means something. Lily nodded once, and for the first time neither of them questioned whether it would last, because what they had built was not based on power or obligation. It was built on a choice made in the middle of fire, a choice that changed everything. And as the city lights stretched out beyond, the glass and the night settled into something calm, Ethan Cole and Lily Carter stood side by side, no longer defined by who they had been, but by who they had chosen to become. And this time, neither of them would be invisible again.